Us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. We thank God for Dr. Monica Parker, Director of Outreach, Recruitment, Engagement at Emory's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center in Atlanta, Georgia. We're grateful that she will come and break down the fundamentals of Alzheimer's disease and answer questions for all of us. And we're grateful for all of these experts that have come from near and far. But because we know there's a road ahead, I just want to once again thank Alzheimer's Association of Greater New Jersey for being here to work with us in the days ahead. So at this time, we're going to call on Dr. Parker, going to ask that the tech ministry help us ensure that everything is set up for Dr. Parker as she prepares to come. And once again, we thank you, thank you, thank you.
Good morning. I've had a nice little walk around Elizabeth. It's such a cute little town. I kind of got a little lost, but it was nice to walk around here. So I wanted to say, for once in my life, I was on time. And I just found this a delightful little town to walk around and see all the people opening up their businesses. So my job here today is to tell you what Alzheimer's is and what it is not. Where I am in Atlanta, I'm a family physician, geriatric primary care provider, and that's what I've done, almost 40 years now. I know, I look so useful. But I think that one of the things in our culture, we like to say, I have a calling. And one of the callings that I have, I started out as an English teacher, is to educate. And one of the things that I've learned in healthcare is doctors can do just so much for everyone. You know, some of us have a God complex, but most of us don't. And I think it's real important in this day and age with the pandemic, what we've learned from the pandemic and everything else, those of us who are above ground need to do everything we can to make it such that we stay there and have the quality of life that we think we deserve. That's not something that a doctor hands you. That's not something that a preacher hands you. That's something that we have a responsibility to ourselves to make sure that we do the best with the resources that have been given. And more importantly, we can't wait for the resources to be handed to us. We have to kind of do a little bit of work to figure out what that is. But the first part of the work is understanding what it is you think you need to know about. Here today we're talking about Alzheimer's and related dementias, but it could be heart disease, it could be cancer, it could be diabetes. And if you are suffering from any of these sorts of things, or you have a loved one who is suffering from these sorts of things, do your own due diligence and learn everything you can about that particular disorder so that you can be best prepared to take care of it. What we learned from the pandemic was, for all the naysayers who didn't think that what was the virus? The COVID-19 virus was a hoax, who think it was a hoax, a lot of people died because of that hoax. And then when a vaccine became available, there were a lot of people who said, that's the government, that's the pharma companies trying to make some money. And a lot of people who believe that died because of that, right? So, not to make health a political statement, but the intersection of science and healthcare is what we do to try to make things better. And we have medications that make things better, but they don't work if you don't take them. Vaccinations don't work if you don't take them. And hypertension is a bad disease, but mostly it's an acquired disease, is it not? Diabetes is an acquired disease. So what I'm going to tell you today, to try to help inform your discussion a little bit about what dementia is and what it is not. We know that there are certain things that we can do that can prevent dementia. So just getting older doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's or a related dementia. There's a lot that goes into it that's a contributing factor. I'm hoping you can see the presentation over there. I do it so often. I talk a little bit more, but for the benefit of those of you who are here, okay, I'm doing the right thing. I'm clicking the arrows, right? You didn't tell me that, or did you tell me that? Okay, all right. So I call this talk Dementia 101, and I've been giving this talk for about 15 years now, simply because in my medical practice at Wesley Woods Geriatric Center, which was a part of Emory University, a lot of the patients that I saw, most of whom didn't have my ethnicity, 95% of the people that I treated didn't look like me at all. But many of them ended up in the geriatric center, not so much because they were old and they really wanted geriatric care, but their families discovered that they weren't thinking and behaving the way they should be. And they decided, oh, I need to take my mother, I need to take my father to a geriatric doctor. And then I started to look around and see that a lot of the people that I was seeing were being introduced to clinical research. Well, at the time that I joined Emory University's Wesley Wood Geriatric Center, I knew about research. I'm a physician. I know about clinical research. I've never actively participated in it. But a lot of my clinical patients were participating in research there, whether it had something to do with Parkinson's disease, which is another neurologic disorder, or Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's in particular. I got into this because I recognized that the few people that did come in there that looked like me were not participating in those same clinical research studies. And I'm like, why not? And the reason the why not was important to me was because at the time, before we had the Affordable Care Act, not Obamacare, but before we had the Affordable Care Act, there were certain screening things, certain diagnostic procedures that were being tested and being evaluated as a routine part of geriatric care. And in the center in which I worked, we were piloting a lot of that. So when you hear me talk about some things, one of the things I talk about is the annual wellness visit. In the annual wellness visit, we do a screening for memory loss. Well, all of my brand new patients who came to see me at Wesley Woods, it wasn't a thing then, every single one of them had a memory screen. Every single one of them had a depression screen. So we were doing active living research. Then come along in 2010 with the Affordable Care Act, the requirement for wellness for older people requires that you get an annual memory screen and a depression screen. Well, I was a part of that research, and the patients that were coming to that clinic were a part of that research. That was a good thing because it identified things. But more importantly, at that time, people who participated in research were being given access to, I'm going to use this word, and Mr. Vergaro can talk about this, cutting-edge therapies, cutting-edge treatments. It's like, oh, they're going to make a guinea pig out of me. Well, you know, sometimes being a guinea pig is a good thing. So I got into research because I wanted to figure out how more people that looked like me could participate and take advantage of being a good guinea pig. Because wellness is something that all of us can do. And that's what that research was about, wellness. Okay, just like the women in here, and most of us are women, that's what I see in my audiences in Atlanta. We'll get our mammograms, we'll get our pap smears, we're going to get our flu shots. Most of the women in here will. Husbands may not, but most of us will. That's preventive health care. So, on with the talk. We're here to talk about Alzheimer's. So who gets Alzheimer's? We have about 6 million people in the United States right now who get Alzheimer's or have been diagnosed actually with Alzheimer's. There are a whole lot more people who haven't been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The persons most likely to get it are going to be over the age of 75. You're going to start to see changes somewhere between 74 and 80. I say that because that's about when it starts. People start repeating themselves, people start forgetting stuff, and people ignore it. They just get an attitude with their parents and they leave them alone until 6 months, a year, 2 years later, something catastrophic happens. And then it's like, oh, hurry up and do something. Too late. So most people, I should say nearly 50% of the people greater than age 85 will have some evidence of cognitive or brain dysfunction. I'm going to call it that. I'm not going to say memory loss, and you're going to hear why. You're going to start to notice some things that aren't quite right. You're not going to really recognize what they are because you don't know what they are. Most of us don't. But you'll start to see some changes. And instead of just observing at a distance, because it's not time, you don't have time, that's the time that you pay attention, and that's the time that you make a visit, an appointment with your loved one to go to the doctor and discuss what you're seeing. When stuff doesn't look quite right, doesn't smell quite right, it isn't. And that's the time not to ignore it and hope that it goes away, but to do a little deeper dive and dig into it and try to figure out why. So if you have a relative somewhere between 74 and I'm going to say 80, and you start to notice that things are a little off, maybe they're not dressing the same way, they're not cooking the same way, they're not keeping to their affairs, their business affairs in the same way, that's the time to make an appointment to see a doctor and try to discuss what's going on and get an evaluation. Don't wait for it to go away because it gets worse. If you're over the age of 85, nearly 50% of the people in that age group have some cognitive dysfunction. Right now, we estimate that we have about 6 million people in the United States who have this disorder. By the year 2030, we'll probably have about 30 million. So what is dementia? What's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So this umbrella, and I'm going to go into it a little bit more, you're going to hear things repetitively, but if I repeat them enough, you'll remember them. Okay, dementia is the umbrella term, and there's several different types of dementia. Okay, there's Alzheimer's, which is the most commonly diagnosed, followed by vascular, which is related to high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol. There's Lewy body, which is something a little different. And then there's frontotemporal. Well, this is the shrinkage of the front part of your brain. And then there are some other types of dementia, and they're mixed dementias. You know, in any one person who dies with a diagnosis of dementia, you may have pathologic features that go along with Alzheimer's, maybe vascular disease, maybe Lewy body, maybe a little bit of everything. I do know that my patients who were African American, who chose to follow me in this research thing that I'm on, said, I'll give you my brain, Dr. Parker. My mother said she'd give me her brain. She's not done with it yet. She's 96, but she lives with me, but she's got advanced dementia. What I found in people of color, our pathologists have found, and we wrote a paper on it, is most of the dementia in people of color is a mixed dementia. It's not a pure Alzheimer's, it's not a pure vascular, it's not a pure anything, it's a mixture. And research is ongoing to understand why we have these mixtures, why these things coexist. So, here's my Alzheimer's Association slide for you Alzheimer's Association people, and I was an Alzheimer's Association board member for 10 years. I've done my time. But they have some of the best slides for encapsulating numbers. Number one, 6th leading cause of death in the United States for people over the age of 65. For African Americans, it's the 4th leading cause of death. Nearly every 66 or 65 seconds, somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Over here, we show that nearly 13 million Americans are providing care to people who are living with Alzheimer's and related dementias. And I'm just going to highlight some of these things, but you can go to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is extremely comprehensive, and get all these facts and figures. Don't take a picture. Just go back to it. Alzheimer's, www.alz.org, right? Where's my Alzheimer's people? Okay. We're going to refer them back, right? I can't remember the phone number, though, all right? But the important part about this slide is it's going to affect some or all of us at some point in time. Some relatives, somebody's going to have it. Here's my pictorial of the umbrella picture. Most commonly diagnosed dementia is Alzheimer's, followed by vascular, frontotemporal, and others. This little combination in here, a mixed Alzheimer's dementia with Lewy bodies or something else. One of the things that I didn't talk about that contributes to the onset of certain types of dementia, and these are the zebra dementias. Chronic alcoholism, okay? Chronic alcoholism results in a type of dementia. Chronic head trauma, we call it chronic traumatic encephalopathy, results in a type of dementia. And it's not just football players. It's people who've been in the military, people who are domestic violence survivors, who've had repetitive head injuries. That's the thing that caused it. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. How many times have you had your head hit up against the wall, thrown up against the wall, that kind of thing? It's not just football players, okay? So dementia is the broad term. There's several other types. This is another page. I had to customize my slides to bring in some New Jersey features. Okay, so you can look at this. You can go to the Alzheimer's Association website, and these are specific stats and statistics just for the state of New Jersey. I'm sorry, I can't see that far over. I'm hoping you can. Can everybody see this? Okay. Ta-da. So, one of the things that I want to discuss, some of the features that I think are real important for you to understand about dementia, is that dementia is deficits in how your brain works. And your brain does more than help you remember stuff, okay? When we think of dementia, people always want to say, oh, she's got Alzheimer's because she doesn't remember anything. I'm going to move this because I can't read and see. There we go. So we call these brain functions domains, okay? Brain functions are domains. What are some of those domains? First one is complex attention. That's what all of you are doing. You're listening to me, you're trying to read that board, you're trying to comprehend what we're all saying and what's being written on that board, right? That's called complex attention. So there's certain brain disorders that have as a characteristic complex attention deficits, okay? Executive function, that's the ability to plan, to organize, and complete tasks and projects. Every one of you here this morning utilized executive function to get yourself organized to get out the door. You have a ritual for dressing and grooming yourself. You put this on your calendar. You knew what time it was. That was planning, right? We call that executive function. Okay, learning and memory is self-explanatory. I won't go into that one. Perceptual motor, identifying and manipulating of figures, being able to operate a pointer, as an example. Being able to tell my brain I want to walk from this point to that point, that's a coordinated brain function. Okay, and then language. Now, I walked around this neighborhood, and you have people in this neighborhood who speak something other than English. Lots of people who speak other than English. So if your first language was Polish, and you've lived in the United States for 50 years, now you're in your 70s and you're reverting back to speaking Polish, that's a sign of cognitive dysfunction and brain dysfunction. People who speak one language when they're young or have learned their first language, maybe they've lived their entire life speaking English, they revert back to the first one, okay? So language memory. When Andrew was talking about his grandmother, we don't understand what she's saying. Okay, she probably spoke English at some point, right? And now she's returned back to speaking only her native language, and then she gets frustrated with you because you don't understand what she says. All right? I grew up in a community where we had lots of people from other countries. I'm from New Britain, Connecticut. So a lot of my neighbors were Polish or Italian, Czechoslovakian. I mean, it didn't really matter. I didn't know where these people came from, but I knew all their grandmothers. We all had shared grandmothers because in that era, our grandmothers were the ones that took care of us. So for my Italian grandmothers, they just say, hey, how's your mother? How's your father? And they give me this big brown bag full of bread, fresh bread. But Paula's grandmother never spoke English to me. But Paula spoke a little bit of English, and she spoke Italian too, so she could communicate with her grandmother. And the reason this is important to me is because I grew up in a polylinguistic community, and most of the people in my generation didn't grow up speaking that language exclusively. We spoke more English, and most of our parents told us not to speak whatever language it was we came from so that we could be good Americans. But our grandparents needed us to be bilingual so they could continue to communicate with us. But anyway, other than reverting to a native language, it may be confusing things. I know that this is a microphone. This is not a hairbrush. I know that this is a pointer. This is not something else. It's not a fork or a spoon. You ever notice that people who forget things don't quite use the right thing for the right tool? That's what we talk about when we're talking about language. And then social cognition. This is my favorite one because people get all frustrated with relatives when they can't call their names. Never mind, I haven't seen you in 5 or 10 years. Why should I know your name? But it's even more confusing when you think, because you live with your mother or your father, that they don't recognize you for who you are. My mother calls me mother. That's what she called her mother. She rarely, if ever, calls me Monica. I think about 3 years ago, on my birthday, she said, Monica. It's like, you remembered my name? So, when you have deficits in 2 or more of these brain functions, we give you a diagnosis of dementia. Does that mean you have Alzheimer's? No. It means you have dementia, all right? I don't know whether it's Alzheimer's or not because we got more stuff to do. But it's important for you to know that dementia is deficits in 2 or more of these brain functions. It may be caused by Alzheimer's. It may be caused by one of these other things, but you have to do some investigation to figure out what it is. But you do know that they've got dementia. So in neurologic circles, if you have deficits in these areas, 2 or more give you a diagnosis of dementia. And I've had people say, well, that doctor doesn't know what she's talking about. My mama's doing just fine. Just because she can wash dishes, make up the bed, and fold clothes doesn't mean she's all right. And there are a lot of family members who get all over you and upset with you because mama's doing just fine. Mama's doing just fine until she isn't. Okay, this is a picture on the right-hand side where it says normal here of a brain at the time of death or autopsy. See how all filled in? I like to say this looks like a good piece of head cheese, all right? It does, doesn't it? Okay? It's all filled in, right? And over here, you got Swiss cheese. We want our brains to look like head cheese. We don't want Swiss cheese. See all the holes here? Okay, right here in this area, this is called the hippocampus. If you have holes or missing pieces of that hippocampus, that's pathologic for Alzheimer's. That is characteristic of Alzheimer's, not of the other dementias, but characteristic of Alzheimer's. Now, when I was in medical school and up until very recently, within the last decade, you had to be dead in order to figure out whether you had head cheese or Swiss cheese, all right? Now there are imaging studies that we can do ahead of time and blood studies that we can do ahead of time that can predict whether or not we've got head cheese or we got Swiss cheese. You want head cheese. Got it? Hippocampal degeneration is characteristic of Alzheimer's. You won't know that, your doctor won't know that unless they've got an image, right? Okay, so what are some of the risk factors for dementia? This is a slide that's been created by the Lancet Commission. It's a graphic that basically talks about the different things that you can do to prevent dementia. So, they got my slide. The person who put this in here mixed things up. So let me go on here and talk about what are some of the symptoms that go along with Alzheimer's. This slide should say symptoms. Memory loss, repetition of words, stories, phrases, loss of bowel and bladder function. How many thought that was a part of dementia? When you think of bowel and bladder function, you think that somebody's being obstinate. Mama, why don't you go in your paper? Why don't you put on these disposable pants? What you need to remember is that's a neurologic function. How many of you are grandparents here and have been through potty training? Babies don't potty train until they're ready. And when they're ready, that means their neurologic system is working such that they can recognize that their bladder is full and their rectum is full and that they need to go to the bathroom. And until they can get that together, they soil themselves. Well, older adults who start to have brain dysfunction, it's a neurologic dysfunction, don't recognize a full bladder and a full bowel. That's why they pee and poo themselves. They don't recognize the need to get to the toilet. Or if they do, they can't get there fast enough, and it's not because they just can't get there fast enough. It's just that, oh, I think I gotta go. All right? Bowel and bladder function, dysfunction, I should say, and control of the bowel and bladder is a neurologic function, and that is a characteristic symptom that goes along with dementia, regardless of cause. Okay? You didn't think about that, did you? Never heard that, did you? It's a neurologic function. Difficulty to independently dress, groom, toilet, feed, or manage your finances or meals, do things for yourself, things that all of us do. Those are things that go along with like memory loss that we think of and associate with dementia. But I want you to look at some of these other things. Yes, older people can be frail and they can be unstable and unsteady with their gait. But what controls your gait? You heard of the cerebellum back here? Well, when the cerebellum shrinks, we have some trouble with physical coordination and mobility. That's a neurodegenerative process. So falls are not just moving your left and your right. That's a coordinated activity that comes from your brain. Having weak knees and a weak hip can contribute to falls, but if you can't get it together up here, you're not going to walk well, are you? Remember I said motor function. That's a brain function. Personality changes. Some people, as they age and they develop dementia, become very, very pleasant. Some people become real mean and nasty. Some people who are always mean and nasty just get nastier. Okay. But some people are pleasantly surprised. It just comes out in weird ways. And when you have really advanced dementia, some people start to have hallucinations and paranoia. Now, if you were in your middle ages and you were paranoid, I had two relatives who had this, I call it the madness gene. I get one side from my father and one from my mother. My father's brother, oh, he was younger than he was, had schizophrenia. And he was always talking to Dave. Dave was always wiring the car. And that was a reason for my uncle not to get in the car. My mother's sister would do the same thing, but she was a genius. Madness kind of runs on that side. But they would do weird things like, you attacked me, say things that aren't true. You stole my money. You took my this. You took my that. Those are starting to be, when you start to hear people who get more ingrained in that kind of thought, if they had mental illness, they still have it, but when they develop dementia, it just gets worse. So, things that are symptoms that are associated with dementia, not necessarily just Alzheimer's, things to think about: memory loss, repetition of words, stories, and phrases. So I put this up here, so please don't ask me what that means when somebody does that. Okay, it just means that something's wrong, right? Stuck record, scratched, repeats itself, right? People who repeat themselves have problems. But these are the things, these are the soft signs, and we're starting to look at these as earlier signs of cognitive dysfunction when people are starting to have problems with these things. Toileting. People who are having difficulty managing their day-to-day activities. And people who are having difficulty with walking. Could be strokes. What are some other things that are associated with dementia? Confusion, trouble paying attention and concentrating. Remember, that's that executive function thing. You can't organize your thoughts. You can't do things together. Some people start to accumulate things or have compulsive behaviors. My mother used to collect white serving trays, you know, the disposable trays that food comes in. She'd rinse them out, stack them up all neatly in the basement. She also collected plastic gallon bottles of like milk. You know, she'd empty them out and fill it up with water. She'd say, something's going to happen and we're going to need water. Hoarding. How many of you have heard that term before? Okay, hoarding. It's kind of like a biologic syndrome. There's something, the point that I'm trying to make is that these are times that you need to pay attention to something that really looks odd to you and get that person in for an evaluation. You don't wait till it gets catastrophic. As a physician, a lot of the things, people would tolerate these weird behaviors, but when things reached a crisis, like when people started getting up in the middle of the night and wandering out of the house, when people's hoarding got such that you couldn't walk in the house, that's when people would bring people to see me at Wesley Woods. Again, these are pretty well-to-do people, and they have doctors. It's just that they've got behaviors that they can't manage, and because this was a geriatric specialty center, they wanted to bring them there to have them sorted out, because at the time we had a residential hospital. And then this one is very common among people who live independently, having difficulty driving, getting lost in familiar places, or getting in an accident all the time. You look at somebody's car and look at all the dings. I ran over the, they run into the poles, things like that. But this one's important. Getting lost in familiar places, having difficulty driving. Well, how am I going to stop them from driving? I don't know. That's your father. You disconnect the battery. You take the keys. Well, if I said, I could say a whole lot of stuff, but I don't live with them. I don't go home with them. It's your job to see to it that they don't get in the car, drive off somewhere and get lost, and end up on the evening news, or more importantly, have an accident where somebody dies. Because then the whole estate, and I have to put it that way, the estate is then liable, right? So, when you start to see these sorts of things, you don't sit there and wait for them to go away. As I've said before, you get an appointment and go see a doctor. And maybe if you're starting to see these things, you need to get the services of other people. An elder care attorney. You need to start finding where these wills are, where the deeds to the property are, and getting that stuff together. Well, she's not dead yet. Nope, she's not dead yet, but you might need to access that stuff to make sure that she gets cared for, right? And you don't want to fight with the rest of your relatives about what needs to be done for your mother or your father or your aunt or your uncle or whoever it is you're trying to take care of. Elders attorneys are important people to have, and I'm sure somebody's going to come after me and talk to you all about what an elder attorney does. But you might also need a social worker, if for nothing else but to manage family disputes, but more to help decide what the best living arrangement is for some people. We have paid case managers who can help you with that sort of thing. And a lot of times these social workers really make it easier for caregiving daughters to explain it to the rest of their family. Because I'm a caregiving daughter. I have two brothers who are really pretty good, but they just wait for me to come around and tell them what to do. They said, well, we figured when you got here, you'd tell us. But I don't need you to wait for me to get here to tell me and figure it out. I need you to tell me right away so that I can intervene if you have somebody that you want to dump on. But the social worker makes it easier to be the dumpee because she tells the family members objectively what's necessary, what you can access, what you need to get. Just saying. So here in the United States, we have over 33 Alzheimer's NIA, NIH-funded Alzheimer's disease research funded centers. NIA, NIH is funded by your tax dollars. If you're not participating in clinical research, you're wasting money. You're pouring money down the drain because you paid for this. And if you're not getting the benefit of this, that's your fault. So, the unfortunate thing about these Alzheimer's disease research centers is there's not one in New Jersey. I have a good friend who left Emory, Dr. William Hugh, who is at Rutgers, and they have an aging and memory center that's being developed, but they don't have yet one of these NIA, NIH-funded facilities. But most academic medical centers where they are medical schools will have a geriatric center and a memory assessment center that you can bring your relative to. I'll put this up here because we just finished our NAC meeting on yesterday actually. I was out in Chicago at that meeting. And this is where researchers from around the country are discussing Alzheimer's and related dementias, who gets it, what are the new trends. So now we're moving away from the A-beta and the amyloid hypothesis and looking at other causes of Alzheimer's and related dementias. As I said before, we're learning that these aren't all the same, all discrete things, and that they're interrelated a lot of times. Some things that make a difference with developing dementia are not just your genetics, but where you live, how you were educated, what you eat. So here in New Jersey, you have the Rutgers Cognitive Neurology Clinic. It's located in New Brunswick, and I understand that's about an hour away from here. Okay. And it's the only New Jersey-based center with subspecialty certified cognitive neurologists and NIH-funded research activities. Not an NIH center, but this is where you can get a definitive cognitive assessment. Neurologists, neuropsychologists, and geriatricians, that's family medicine doctors like me, neuropsychologists who do the testing, and the neurologists who put it all together are there to help evaluate and treat people who have problems with their brains, okay? Mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia. They were the first to bring modern biomarker-based diagnosis of Alzheimer's to New Jersey. William told me to say that. So that's how we diagnose it. Remember I talked about head cheese and Swiss cheese, and you had to be dead before you got it? Well, now we look at special brain images on a PET scan, an amyloid PET scan, but insurance doesn't pay for it. Research does. And the other thing that we're using diagnostically is cerebrospinal fluid. So to get an accurate and effective diagnosis to rule out Alzheimer's, we're looking at your cerebrospinal fluid in research, but also in the clinic, to look for the pathologic features or concentrations of proteins that accumulate in Alzheimer's. Now, I talked about that PET scan only being available through research. And that research is important because having an FDA-approved PET scan, which nobody pays for, not your insurance, not Medicare, nobody pays for it. Research does, because it's $6,000 a pop. And if you have money enough to pay for it, you can get one. You can go demand that somebody give you one if you're going to up the cash. Most of us, whether we can or not, well, can't you get it on my insurance? Nah, you can't. And the unfortunate thing about that is that a lot of people have dementia, but they're not getting an accurate diagnosis. And the medications that have been developed by Biogen, by Lilly, by Genentech and Roche, all these drugs that you're reading about, AZI just released some of their findings about their drug. It's a monoclonal antibody. Well, you can't get that monoclonal antibody and give it to somebody who has alcoholic-related dementia. You can't give that monoclonal antibody to somebody who has a stroke-related dementia. Those monoclonal antibodies are only for people who have Alzheimer's, and you have to have a proof that you have it. So, anyway, they're going to be doing that in Rutgers, New Brunswick. For those of you here, what can you do? What can you do if you're 65 years of age and older? You can submit yourself to an annual wellness visit. This allows you to get a preventive, personalized health care plan for yourself. We look at all kinds of preventive things. Have you gotten all your immunizations? Excuse me. Have you done what you need to do to get healthy? Have you got your vision tested? Have you gotten tested for cancer, mammograms, colonoscopies, PET scans of your lung, or CT scans of your lungs if you're a smoker? Have you gotten your hearing tested? This is not a physical exam. It's a checkoff exam that's usually done by your medical assistant or the nurse in your doctor's office, verified by him. Your Medicare pays for it. It doesn't require a copay, and things that are generated, the referrals and the laboratories that are done, come at no cost to you or your insurance. So, one of the things that we talked about are the different causes of Alzheimer's. And on this list, the things that we can prevent: education to become health literate, and that means being literate. Okay, avoiding alcohol abuse, picking the right neighborhood where there's less air pollution, monitoring your hearing and getting that assessed, preventing obesity, managing diabetes and hypertension, because they are major risk factors for strokes, which are preventable. But risk factors include hypertension, obesity, and diabetes, and high cholesterol. Being physically inactive. We can all be a little bit more physically active. Being socially engaged, much like you are now, are things that we can do to help forestall dementia. Getting depression, if you have it, treated, because untreated depression masquerades as dementia. So the things that we can do that are within our control are to control these things. We can control depression. We can seek treatment for alcohol abuse. We can address hearing impairment. We can get up off our tails and exercise a little bit more to eliminate obesity, which leads to hypertension and diabetes. And we cannot smoke. These sorts of things are risk factors for strokes, which are very common in communities of color. Strokes are the result of hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol. I know the churches do this forever and forever and amen, but more importantly, we don't pay attention. That's why we suffer so much. We don't get it addressed. That's something that you can take care of. That's your thing to manage. Your doctor can tell you, but if you still sit down and don't get out and exercise, you're at risk for these things. What can you do? Exercise. You can take statins to control your risk for strokes. Again, remain socially engaged, treat your depression, manage your chronic diseases, getting enough sleep. How much sleep do you need? Whatever your body says it needs. And if you say, I can only need 4 or 5 hours a night, I can do fine. No, you don't. When you go to sleep, that's when your body your brain clears itself of the amyloid and recharges. If you're having difficulty sleeping, I can't tell you why that is. But there are sleep specialists, pulmonologists who can help you with that. But sleeping is important to get your brain straight, okay? Eating a healthy, heart-healthy diet. I'm not going to say Mediterranean because we're not Mediterranean. All of us in this room have no Mediterranean extraction, okay? The people in Japan aren't of Mediterranean extraction, right? Heart healthy. So if you can't remember Mediterranean, remember heart healthy. You know what that is, right? That's low fat, lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, more physical activity. And I'm going to highlight this one for those of us who are grandparents. In the talk at NAC, they talked a lot about language use, learning a language, and music. If you want to do something for your grandchildren to help their brains be resilient to whatever it is they face, invest in music lessons, invest in language lessons. I know we like football. This is an American tradition, but that's head trauma, right? You want to invest in your child's brain health? Formal training in music and language. How many of you in this room had to take piano lessons when you were little? Okay, you had to do something, okay? Go back to doing that. Because your child learns to lay down some neural pathways that they can pick up later when some of them don't work. So invest in language lessons, invest in music lessons, and tell your children that they don't have to worry about it because you're going to take care of it, because you know that's the next thing. Who's going to pay for it? Grandparents will. So do something for the next generation, invest in music and language training for your children to help their brains. Now, it'll also help yours. If you played an instrument, go back and recover some of that, relearn some of that. That's good for your brain. So, what does it take to diagnose dementia, Alzheimer's, or something else? First of all, you need a comprehensive physical exam to make sure that what's being observed is not caused by a medical condition. And we look at all your medicines to make sure you're taking what you're supposed to be taking for all the right reasons and all the right dosing. In being a doctor who practiced in an urban setting, I had patients that came from rural places to see me. So they wouldn't tell me what their doctor in Sparta gave them, but they just say, these are the medicines you gave me. But then the daughter would bring the whole bag of medicines that the doctor in Sparta was giving them, but she never told me that she was taking them. And they were taking 2 different doctors' medicines, many of which had been prescribed for the same disorder, taking them twice. So a lot of older people do that, and you shouldn't do that. So brain imaging, one of the things that everybody does, I talked about the PET scan, but more commonly in most doctors' offices, we're going to order a brain MRI or maybe a brain CT. There's an order to this, people. The primary care doctor has to rule out the things that are treatable and fixable and do some legwork such that the neurologist can start to put this together. You need the services of a neuropsychologist who does the testing. I call it the IQ test for older adults. Those of you who are teachers, you have children that don't learn, you send them for testing. When we have older adults whose brains don't function, we send them to the clinical neuropsychologist to test their brain functions. All right? And then finally, you may go to the neurologist to get the spinal fluid analysis that I talked about, who interprets everything and puts things together. Diagnosing dementia is a process. It is not instantaneous. A 5-minute screening exam in the doctor's office is not diagnostic. It is a screening exam. The diagnostic process involves a comprehensive medical examination that includes an EKG. I got to put that in there because irregular heart rates and rhythms cause problems. Medications, medical history, looking at all your diagnoses to make sure that you're being properly treated, and testing for things that you might think aren't important, like thyroid, abnormal thyroid function. Have you been treated for syphilis? Yeah, I put that in there because sexually transmitted diseases do cause problems with your brain. Latent syphilis, that was the Tuskegee experiment. If just to say, the Tuskegee experiment was latent syphilis, okay? And then vitamin test. Deficiencies in vitamin D, D as in David, B, B12, and folate are associated with cognitive dysfunction. How much? How much do you need? Well, I like to say, and most neurologists will agree, you take a supplement if you need it. Which ones should I take? The ones you need. So if you have a vitamin D as in dog deficiency, there is a prescription strength vitamin D, 50,000 units, that's given once a week for 12 weeks. We go back and retest. If you have a tendency toward having a problem with vitamin D deficiency, we'll let you take an over-the-counter one. But just willy-nilly just taking stuff just to be taking it is not the thing to do. I want a B12 shot. I feel better when I take a B12 shot. Well, do you have a B12 deficiency? Having too much B12, having too much vitamin D, having too much CoQ10 is just as bad as not having enough. I think you get my point, right? So you test for these things, all right? What do we have to treat Alzheimer's? Well, if you've heard of these medicines, Aricept, Razidine, Exelon, the pill or the patch, those are medicines designed to treat Alzheimer's. That's not designed to treat chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's for Alzheimer's. Got it? Now, Namenda is another drug that we will add for people who have Alzheimer's. All right? Sometimes when people have symptoms of not sleeping, belligerence, and other things, they may be put on an antidepressant. Well, she's not depressed. Why they put her on an antidepressant? Because the side effect of the antidepressant is better than putting them on one of these medicines. So if you're not eating enough, we might put you on some mirtazapine to help you improve your appetite, but it also helps you sleep. Trazodone is an antidepressant, and in lower doses, it does help somebody sleep at night. Zoloft, citalopram, Lexapro, those are antidepressants. They do kind of help with agitation and irritation in patients with dementia. Doesn't mean that they have depression, but these are medications that may be prescribed. In older or geriatric care, we generally like to avoid the antipsychotic medicines. These are the people who have genuine mental illness, the people who in their adult life had schizophrenia, had bipolar disorder, had paranoia. They were on these types of medicines before. They still need those medicines. They just probably need them prescribed differently. But somebody who has garden variety, generic Alzheimer's or other dementias should not be placed on these medications because the side effects are not what you want. Here, and this is I think just about my final slide, this is to let you know that there are more than 100 different clinical trials going on for Alzheimer's and related dementias throughout the United States and the world. Some of these are focused on behavior, some of them are on diagnostic, but most of them are on therapeutics. And that's where you have the companies like the Biogen, the Lilly's, the Eisai's come in, because most of this clinical research is funded, yes, by the federal government, but a significant amount of the drugs, any drug that you take, has been developed by a pharmaceutical company. And I'm bringing this up because pharmaceutical companies aren't bad things. They're really good things for us. And so when I get somebody who gets on a rant about Big Pharma helps us a lot. It's helping you today, all right? Monoclonal antibodies, these drugs, the drug that Biogen manufactured, something called aducanumab. FDA approved it, but it still costs a lot of money to get it, and there are a lot of restrictions on how that drug is to be administered. It has to be administered in a hospital or a, infusion site? right? Those are things that drive up the cost of this medication, but the federal government's restrictions on this medication require that people who are on it be followed as if they were in a clinical trial. And so aducanumab was the first, I like to say, the first shot fired for monoclonal antibodies. There are about 10 others that are in development. And as research progresses and as FDA approval gets here, we may have a combination of monoclonal antibodies that we use for treating Alzheimer's. That's not all the other dementias I talked about. That's for Alzheimer's. Okay, so Lilly has a drug that's coming out. Roche has a drug that's coming out. And as things progress, we might get to be with Alzheimer's the way we are with HIV. A combination of drugs works. We don't know what that combination is, so don't ask. We haven't gotten it yet, okay? I want you to appreciate that dementia is not a normal type of aging, and it's not inevitable. There are things that you can do to offset and make it less likely that you develop dementia. One of those is getting up off your tail, exercising, eating properly, remaining socially engaged, checking your hearing. Different types of dementia have different treatments and different causes, and the treatments that I've described today for Alzheimer's are not specific and appropriate for the other ones. Research is ongoing. Find one to participate in. You can look at clinicaltrials.gov. My favorite research site is Research Match, and that's one way to find and identify a research study that fits your needs and your interests. All research centers don't do the same research at the same time. That's why you need to look at clinicaltrials.gov or Research Match to find the research that interests you. I don't really care which research you participate in. If you're interested in Alzheimer's, I want you to participate in Alzheimer's research. If you're interested in cancer prevention, I want you to find cancer prevention trials and participate, because you're only going to get better health care by participating in a clinical research trial. And a clinical research trial is not always pharmaceutical. A lot of times it's just asking what you're doing. These are the things that we have shown that work well in people. It's a questionnaire. It's an observational studies. All clinical research is not guinea pig medicine, but a lot of the guinea pig medicine is what we call observational trials, and a lot of us need to participate in them. The pandemic, the COVID-19 vaccine, which was co-developed by an African-American woman, was developed, the research that started that was for the Ebola virus. All right? It was not for COVID-19. It was for the Ebola virus, and the research and the stuff that they developed could be applied to the COVID pandemic. Thank God we had it. That was research people. And we had real-time research developing a vaccine that would be useful for children. Right? You saw that in the news. You saw we're working on this vaccine, the Moderna, the Pfizer. We're working on this vaccine to see which age group it's appropriate for. Now we have boosters. I'm a new grandmother, and my grandchild is 11 months, and to my chagrin, she started daycare in September. Well, she went and got her second COVID shot on Monday. They made her miserable. But I want her to have that shot. All right? So the pandemic I'm grateful for. I know that there are a lot of sad things that went along with it, but the pandemic taught people how important clinical research participation was. It helped you understand the interface between clinical research and public health. Having the pandemic helped us understand how all of us play a role in ensuring better public health. Alzheimer's is not really it's not like a pandemic, it's not like an epidemic, but it is. It is a public health concern, because a lot of public health dollars, your tax dollars, are going to help take care of people who are so affected. So these are my favorite things for you to learn more about dementia. Again, I'm a doctor. I can do just so much. I need you to be better informed. www.alzu.org. This is done. Website created by Wild Presbyterian, kind of does an A to Z on what Alzheimer's is. Very easy to follow. When you enter it, you're actually entering a study. www.alzu.org. Yes, we got the Alzheimer's Association, and by the time you finish tabbing through, you'll get to stuff. but this is a very good primer. I want you to learn about the Lancet Commission's report on dementia. It's been updated since 2020, and these are the things that you can do to prevent dementia or make it less likely that you develop dementia. And then I put the Rutgers website down here because of my colleague and friend William, who is at Rutgers and wants very much to get people engaged in clinical research here in New Jersey. Thank you. Are they taking questions now?
Thank you so much, Dr. Parker. We'd like to thank Dr. Parker again for that excellent presentation. I've heard her before, and I knew we had a great person coming today. Okay, we're now going to ask the caregivers panelists to come forward, please. And we have 3 caregivers, individuals who actually cared for their loved ones who had been diagnosed with either Alzheimer's or some type of dementia, and they're going to share their story with us today. We have Lorraine Brooks Body, who is a member of Cathedral International. You can clap, sure. This mic? Okay. I'll repeat that. We have Lorraine Brooks Body, who is a member of Cathedral International in Perth Amboy, but she's also a daughter of this church and grew up here, and we're happy to have her with us today. She will share her story in a few, but I do want to just mention that she's very active with the Urban League of Union County, the Roselle Board of Education, and she worked for Wake Firm for 50 years. Bless her heart. Our second panelist that I will mention is Lydia Troutman, who is a member of First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens. She is the Director of Microbiological Quality and Sterile Assurance at Merck. Amen. So I saw her nodding her head a lot during the presentation. And she's also no stranger to us. She's a daughter of Mount Teman, and we're very familiar with her family growing up here, and she's going to share her story. And then we have Dr. Lois Roxon. She is the director of the cytotechnology program at Rutgers School of Health Professions. And if you don't know what cytotechnology is about, ladies, when you get your pap smear, she's the person, she trains individuals in the only program in New Jersey for that field.
Bless you.
So we're blessed to have these women with us today, and I'm going to simply ask them to share with us as we've prepared. And we'll start with Lorraine Brooks Body, and one second. We're going to ask each panelist to share their overall experience as a caregiver of a person with Alzheimer's or dementia or memory loss. Share what resources or assistance you received during that time, and also share what challenges you encountered and how you overcame them. And so we'll begin with Lorraine Brooks Body.
I was a caregiver for over 20 years between my 2 parents. My father, I noticed a difference in 1996, and he was forgetting things. And at the time, my mother was working for an attorney in Short Hills. She spoke to him about what was going on in our household, that my dad was losing his memory. The legal part of it had to kick in, and that's where I came in. What do I mean by that? I had to review all their bank accounts and make sure that they were set up as or instead of and. And that's so my mother was able to have access, to the bank accounts. And you gotta remember, my mother and father came from old school. So most of the accounts were in my father's name only. I had to review the deeds of the houses. At that time, we had 6 houses. I had to find the will that my mother had not seen. And again, there was this code in our house that you didn't go into your parents' stuff. So I had to we start opening drawers and start looking, and we found the will. I had to review the registration for the cars. I had to find his VA papers. I had to find the insurance policy. Well, any changes that had to be made, my father had to be lucid. So again, when he had a good day, I had to take both my parents to the bank in order to make changes to the bank account and make sure that or was included in my mother's name was, on the accounts. During this episode of Alzheimer's with my father, he walked away twice. And at that time, my girls were in high school. My husband was alive. And I worked a full-time job. And I was on the road a lot. And I wore a beeper. So if that beeper went off, it stressed me out. Where I could have been in Connecticut, I could have been in Maryland. But I had to make a beeline home if my mother called me that there was something going on. The hardest thing for me as a daughter was when he couldn't dress himself. And there was one time that I went, and he had this off-white thing on. I'm like, where did he get a toga from? It wasn't a toga. He had put his underwear on, I don't know how, across his body. I had to call my husband Larry a lot of times to help get him dressed because I couldn't do that if he was not dressed, in the room. I was a backup for my mother. So when I came in, I relieved her. In order for her to continue going to Mount Heman, my mother would leave at 10. I would come in from the cathedral in order to relieve her, because I didn't want her not to be able to go to church. Again, guys, I had older brothers and sisters. I had an older brother. I had 2 older stepsisters, a stepfather. I had a younger sister and a sister middle. I was it. I was it. It's because I love my mother so dearly that I did what I had to do. I had to put that legal hat on to make sure everything was in order. My father didn't die from Alzheimer's. My father fell down the steps and he broke his neck. That's how my father died. It was from the breaking of his neck. I would do it again. I would do it again. So that was my first term of Alzheimer's. Then it came my mother. As you all know, 2010, my older brother died. 2012, my husband died. 2013, my mother had a stroke. And that's when the dementia, started. My mother, again, once after my father died, my mother, we had to get her legal stuff together. So I had to get her will done. I had to look at a living revocable trust, a financial power of attorney. And we had to find all the insurance policies. After my mother had the stroke, she went to a rehab center for over probably 2 months. It was a lot. I had to become her advocate. I didn't really know what that meant at first. The advocate was to make sure she was being taken care of, to monitor the medicine that was being issued at the daycare center, at the rehab center. Also to question any doctor. And my mother, my mother was classified, and I also took her to a geriatric doctor where she was diagnosed with stage 4 vascular dementia. And like she said, he looked at all her medication, you gave her a test, and again, all of this was foreign. I didn't know what dementia was, but I knew she had a stroke. I knew she was losing her memory about certain things. But one thing Ruth Brooks was able to do, she knew if they came in with more than 4 pills, she would go nuts and not take them. And I would get a call, your mother's acting up, she's not taking the medication. And I would come in and say, so how many pills were you trying to give her? And he said, oh, we're going to give her 5. I said, did I approve that 5th pill? And the answer was no. But what I learned from one of my store owners in reference to becoming an advocate, he said to me, Lorraine, in order to become an advocate, you have to really kind of take care of the people that are taking care of your mother. So maybe once a month you take them donuts or you bring them coffee or something and you make your visits. I was working a full-time job. I would go to the rehab center between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, get on the parkway, be in my office. After I left work, I would come back, and make sure she's okay, do her hair, stay there till 8 o'clock, and then come home. I would do it again. I would do it again. So once we brought her home, we got together, and my daughters, my nephew, one of my nieces would come into the house and take care of my mother while I left for work. When they informed me that, when we got an outside caregiver and she came into the house, and then when she informed me that she couldn't do it, I was cleaning up some magazines in my room, and all of a sudden this YWCA booklet falls, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I'm not looking for exercises. But I found on the back that they had an adult daycare center. And I had taken my mother to different daycare centers. And the reason she didn't like them, because they didn't speak English. So when I found this one in Union, I said to my mother Saturday morning, I said, hey, Ma, I found a daycare center in Union. Why don't we go visit it? So we get in the car and we go to, and it's called Weiss Daycare Center in Union. And what I liked about them, for me, it was because they open from 7 to 6 p.m. When we walked into the center, my mother said to me, this is okay, Lorraine. So we made the decision that she would go to an adult daycare center, which costs us $72 $72 a day. I really didn't care. It was how I could go to work comfortably, and whoever could take care of my mother, that was the most important thing. And when we went there, there were African-American women. When I explained to them that Ruth Brooks was a Southern woman, they got it. They called her Miss Ruth. They took care of her. And what was also good about the center, they took care of me. So again, I also had to get the house ready, and it's called senior proofing. I had to put up the chain locks. I had to put have the bar put in the bathroom, inside the tub, next to the toilet. I had to remove all rugs if we had any on the floor. And it was hard. It was hard, but being able to take her to that center and know that she was going to be okay was great for me. And it wasn't easy. My mother gave me a bloody nose. I wrenched my shoulder, but it was okay. Because I experienced, whenever there was a full moon, it would affect her personality. Whenever there was a change of seasons, it would affect it. There were some nights that I didn't sleep because she would be off the chain for a full moon or change of season all night. You know, my mother, she was calm. But whenever this happened, she was mean. She would be screaming, you know, opening the window, screaming, help me, help me, help me. But I would have to just like, stay with it. Go in the bedroom and I start confining. Whenever that happened, I have my calendar. I knew there was a full moon. Whenever there's a change of season, I had a calendar. I knew that. But I knew I was in store for not sleeping all night. All night. And she would calm down, or she would be calm enough for me to take her to the daycare center. I would get dressed. If I could get her in that car, get her to the center, I would call ahead and say, guys, I haven't slept all night. They would come out to the car and take her in. And some mornings I would be bawling, and they would stand there with me and get me calm enough so I could go to work. But what also helped me was going to the caregivers meeting, going to the Alzheimer's workshop. My faith was very strong. My mother could remember the 23rd Psalm, so whenever she would be off, I would get her to recite the 23rd Psalm, and then she would calm down once we got through the 23rd Psalm. But I also lived with Psalm 90:10, and I also kept in my heart and recite the 5th commandment, honor thy mother and father, that their day may be long. And I knew my mother was 90-something, and Psalm 90:10 told me, it's okay, because she superseded, 70. And that for me was soothing to know these things, that it was going to be okay. My mother died January 2017. And I'm telling you, I would do it again. And the reason I'm here to share, to let you know that your faith becomes stronger. These passages helped me get through it. My journey was for my parents. And I'm gonna leave you with this. In 2019, I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer. And then I rang the bell. 16 weeks ago, they found a spot outside my liver, and I'm back on chemo. But here I stand because I promised God that I was not going to keep any of this a secret. So that is why I'm here, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine, for sharing your story with us. And now we'll hear from Dr. Lois Roxon.
So my father, Fitzroy Forrest, died from Alzheimer's on December 10th, 2019, a couple of weeks before the pandemic started. I was his caregiver for a year, like I can't believe. It's hard to describe. There were clues that my father, there was something wrong, but we attributed it to the grief of my mother passing in 2017. He took it really, really hard. They were married for almost 50 years. And we knew that when Mom died, she died of congestive heart failure, so it was a slow progress that it would hit him hard. My parents were living in Florida. They retired there. It was their dream. We're from Jamaica, but because of Mom's illness, they couldn't get back home. So Florida, like it is for many Jamaicans, was the closest thing to back home. And we were really happy for them, but we knew that, you know, with an ailing mother and then with my father being left alone, that something was going to have to give. And so when Mom died, Dad started to rotate between my sisters and I. I have a sister in Florida and one in Arizona. And I'll say now, one of the lessons learned is that I will never move away from my children. I think you have to be close. Don't move away. Don't retire far. It causes trouble and it's not worth it. I'll just say that. We noticed things. The first thing was the memory loss, and on one of his stints in Arizona, a year before things went downhill, my sister called to say that he got up in the middle of the night and tried to run away because someone was trying to kill him. And he tried to get out at the house through the closet. And there were scratches on the closet door as he tried. And he said, when my sister went, that, "Get away from me, why are you trying to kill me? I need my gun to kill you." And that was the first clue. And anyway, he came back to New Jersey, and memory loss, and then the bowel and the bladder issues. And we would find the sheets full of feces in the morning, but he was okay. And we kept saying, well, he's okay, but he's having these problems. We didn't know how to approach it or talk to him, because it's like we're having a conversation, but yet you're having this behavior. His primary care doctor was in Florida, and in August of 2018, I asked a cousin to take him down to Florida to his doctor, and I said, something's wrong, we need a diagnosis. And so my cousin went down with him, and he was diagnosed based on the tests that the physician talked about with vascular dementia. My father was a chronic alcoholic, as you mentioned, and he was a diabetic. And so exactly as you said, that perfectly aligned. Literally, in the time that he was diagnosed, my father went from being 76 to a 5-year-old person. And it was amazing. My cousin was with him in Florida, and he just declined. I flew down, I'm the oldest daughter. The plan was for him to go to my sister. When I got the diagnosis, the doctor said to me, surprisingly, your father is eligible to go in hospice. And I said, but hospice is for someone who's dying of cancer. And he said, no, hospice is for anyone that seems to have an illness that's terminal. I immediately got in contact with Vitas Healthcare in Florida, and they immediately came and gave my father an assessment. We set up for him to go to Miami, where my sister lived. It was a Wednesday. I was taking him on Thursday. My sister texted me Wednesday night and said, I'm sorry, I cannot take care of Dad. And I immediately called hospice crying and said, my sister can't take him. I have to go back to New Jersey. What do I do? She said, don't worry. When you get to New Jersey, call us. We'll be there. I had a time of my life having a man who was peeing and defecating on himself to put him on a van and fly with him from Orlando Airport. And I'm like, he's going to use the bathroom for himself. How do I take him into the man's room to change him? It was horrible. But as soon as we got back to New Jersey, Vitas Healthcare, the hospice care, were there. We got the nurse who came out and assessed him. I was able to get someone who came in to take care of him for 2 hours a day, whatever time that I needed. And then I started to recruit from my village. I called my aunt in New York, and I said, I know there's a whole network of home health aides. I need someone to come take care of Dad. She reached out to her congregation, And sure enough, 4 weeks later, Miss Janet became my live-in. And Miss Janet renegotiated $150 a day. We're like, how are we gonna get this money? Thank God my parents had saved. It's like they put the money aside. And from Dad's savings, we were able to afford for Miss Janet to come in and be his caretaker. So she lived with us. We had our basement finished. My parents had done that before they moved to Florida in case anyone needed to come back to Jersey. Thank God they did that. And so we had a space for them. And besides having Miss Janet and the hospice lady come in, we had a doctor who came in once a week, all covered by Medicare. So hospice covers all of that. We had a pastor who would come in and talk to Dad, and we had a volunteer. It was a Russian lady who loved to come every Friday, and my dad would talk patwa to her, and she loved it. The challenges with Dad, he had sundowning. When the sun would go down at night, he would start acting up, and we would watch and we would know. And we would always try and get him out of it. And one day when he was doing sundowning, it was the heights of the whole presidential and Trump scandal. And Stormy Daniels, do you remember that person's name? Mm-hmm. He started to laugh when somebody in the news said Stormy Daniels. We picked up on it. Anytime Dad started to have his moment, we would break him out of that by saying Stormy Daniels. Yeah. It was amazing because when he went to sundowning, he would curse, he would hit, he would say the most nastiest things, and it was horrible, not knowing how to respond to your father. But we would say, it's not your fault, my father. My children learned a lot. On the weekends, we gave Miss Janet the weekend off, and we would change Dad's diapers. Actually, it was my son who was 18 who first showered him. He had defecated on himself, and no one was home. My son called and said, "Mom, he can't sit like this." And I said, wait, I'm going to get home. He said, "No, I'm going to do it." And I was so proud of my son who took off his grandfather's clothes, gently showered him, and cleaned him up to make him feel better. And my two children, ever since, took care of him. We took care of him on the weekends. I would do it again in a minute. Yeah. When my father died, he died in a Vitas Hospice Center in Wayne. At the end of his life, he developed pemphigus vulgaris. Pemphigus bullous. His skin he could develop sores all over his body. It was horrible. So we had to put him in, and my two children actually held his hand and sang a combination of hymns and Bob Marley songs to him, and let him go. If it wasn't for the hospice care, I don't know what we would do. I agree. Besides all of the people I described, they allowed us to have respite as a family. So if we wanted a weekend off, they would come, the ambulance would come and take Dad to a nursing home. There was one close to home where I live in Maplewood, and he would go, and then I'm fortunate that I've got a lot of cousins around, and they would go, come to our house, but also when Dad was on respite, go there and visit him and take care of him. It really takes a village to do it. But I'll be also honest, it creates tension in families, as the doctor talked about. I wish we had had a social worker to help with my sisters who were afar. There were times I would call them. I was doing my dissertation work, and it was very hard being a mother, a caregiver, a professor, and doing my dissertation. And I would call and I would say, "Can you just come for 2 weeks? Put him in a home. You can't take care of it. We can't take care of it." And I'll be honest, it caused a rift in the family, but that will heal, that will get better, that will come back around. But my family and I and my children, what an honor to be able to take care of someone at that, our parent at that end stage. He became our baby. He literally became our baby. They say once a man, twice a child. Truer words have never been said, but it takes a village to get you through. So, thank you.
With us, and now we'll have Ms. Lydia Troutman share her experience.
Hello, everyone. I think my journey first started, I realized about being caregiver when I watched my mother take care of her mother. And she took care of her in her home. We lived downstairs for as long as she could. But her sisters wanted my grandmother to go to a nursing home. My mother never wanted that. But 3 sisters against 1, she moved to a nursing home. And I would go to the nursing home with my mother. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. And I would see my mother care for my grandmother. And I would go every Sunday after I leave this church, Sunday school, and go see my grandmother. And I thank God that he put that in my spirit to do for it, because I didn't know what the future would be for me as it is now. I'm caregiver for my father-in-law, who's 92 years old. I was caregiver for my mother-in-law during her sickness. My father-in-law had a stroke, I would say about 10 years ago. He has aphasia. And that's, as the doctor shared, that's one of the things for dementia coming. My mother-in-law was a caregiver for him during that time, but in the year 2020, in the beginning in January, I think it just took a toll on her, and then her health started to fail. And so I took her to the doctor one time. She kept saying, something's wrong, I need to go to the doctor, so we did. And they found nothing. But one day she fell down the stairs and hit her head, and they took her to the emergency room. And they did a scan, and they saw a spot on her lung. And so they wanted to do a biopsy, and my mother-in-law didn't want to do that biopsy. I had set up to go to surgeons for that, and they told her it's very small, it's probably, if radiation probably would take care of it, but she didn't want to do it. She had made up her mind that she had cancer. She had never had the diagnosis, but she had made up her mind. And once she makes up your mind, that's the power of your mind, she started to go downhill from that point on. I moved into the house with them to take care of her as well as my father-in-law, because she no longer wanted to cook, she no longer can cook there. So I actually slept in a chair for about 3 to 4 months before she died. And taking care of my father-in-law, I brought my computer there, I did my work there. Unfortunately, I work from home, and was taking care of both of them. One day, she's hollering, help me, because she would go through these hysterics. He leaving the house, walking out the house, trying to walk down the street. My watch, which I have an Apple Watch, it alarmed with my BMS, was 160, and I'm sitting, which everyone knows that's not normal. Right. And all of a sudden I started to shake. Well, I had to get up and go get him, and then try to calm her down. And I realized that this was going to be a journey. It's going to be a journey until God says it's time for their time to be over. But I also came to realize it was my assignment. I knew from some studies I had done at my church that my spiritual gifts are giving and service. So now this is the time for me to step up to those spiritual gifts. Just everyone knows, because I grew up in this church, my mother-in-law, and I call her my mother-in-law, but I was married to her son. We were divorced when my daughter was 4, but we were family forever. We raised our child together. We were just like family. She thought of me as her daughter, and I thought of her as my second mother. So when it came to time for me to take care of them, it was just a normal, okay, never knowing the challenges that come with being a caregiver. So I had help, thank Evelyn Chapman, who would come by and see my mother, and she saw me to the point where I couldn't stay. I needed a break. So she said, I'll stay overnight and sleep in the chair like I slept a couple of nights to give you a break. And you can't do it by yourself. You really, even though as much as you try and your heart wants to, you begin to break down. And you're no good to them if you break down. So Evelyn, I thank God for her up and through the time my mother-in-law passed away in September 2020. She was there helping me. My brother-in-law Keith was in denial of Parkinson. So he just looked at his mother as he was in denial of seeing her, but he was in denial of his own affliction upon his body. So I realized that, so I said, let me just step up. My daughter couldn't see her grandparents faltering the way they were. So I say, listen, Joy, you just do and come and see your grandparents when you can. So, and when my mother-in-law passed, I realized that my father-in-law, it almost like immediately he started to go downhill. I think because when she was there, he had her there, but immediately it seems like he started to take things apart. He took the water heater apart. He started taking assembly. Now, he's always been a man. He had his own television repair business, so he's always been, and they know in his church, anything go wrong, they call Harry. So he can take care, he knew electrical and all that. But with the way he was now, he would take it apart but couldn't put it back together again. So when he took and unbeknownst to us, he took the water heater out. Maybe the hot water wasn't on. He took the water heater out. He started to take the electrical. One time I came in, I went out. He came in, and he had taken I smelled gas. Gas. Well, he decided to take in the older houses. They had electrical box, electric outlet above the stove. So apparently he took the electrical outlet and accidentally hit the stove, so the gas was, I called the fire department because I know it was. So the fire department, he probably did, I cut that stove off. From no longer, he needed not to cook. So as time went on, I realized that he needed someone there all the time, which I could not do it by myself. But God is so good. God is so good. He always has a plan, and he always has somebody. So across the street from me, from my mother-in-law's house, unbeknownst to me, was my cousin on both sides, one on the Peterson side and one on the Harris side. And she was a nurse who had specialized in stroke patients. And she said, Lydia, he's going to need more care than you think he's going to need. It just so happens that her sister-in-law had just finished who was a caregiver for over 20 years, just finished a case where her patient went home to be the Lord, was available. That young lady, Tracy Britton, is heaven sent. She has taken my father-in-law, and she's her family. She has, as he has progressed, or degressed, how you want to say it, to being more and more, and see, the thing with a man different than a woman, a man doesn't want to feel like he doesn't need any help. So my father-in-law would fight you and everything, and then he wanted to kiss you afterwards. But she knew, but she had a little bit enough assassin's like my mother-in-law to just back him up, just say little sharp words to him, and he was like a pussycat, because everybody know my mother-in-law know how to handle Harry, and so she is a blessing. She is a blessing. My brother-in-law, unfortunately, with his Parkinson, has dementia too. He is in worse shape than my father-in-law. His wife is taking care of him. In the situation of taking care of my father-in-law, my daughter handles paying all the bills because she's power of attorney. I knew I couldn't do it all. I take care of making all the food 7 days a week. I take care of the doctors. I take care of everything, the house, everything that needs to be taken. And the caregiver, and I call her caregiver because she's more than a caregiver, she's there taking care of him. I could not do what she does. And I had to accept I couldn't do it. She does. I can only do what I can do. I'm trying to keep him in his home because I remember when my grandmother went to that nursing home. That's a slow walk home. I wanted to keep my father-in-law in his house where he can tinker with things that we can control. It's familiar to him. But as I see, and I talked to my daughter about it this week, I said, Joy, he's in the hospital right now because he did something down his basement, that he took something apart, and he probably injured himself. His hand swelled up. And we took him, the caregiver, my daughter, took him to the emergency room, and they kept him because it's an infection. and he probably will come home tomorrow. But I was saying to my daughter, and even the caregiver says, she's there 24 hours a day. She even said there's going to come a time where I can't manage him in the home. As much as her heart, she takes him to her house. Her family loves him. They party together. I mean, she's made him a part of her family. But she's just going to come a time, as much as you want to keep him in his environment, we may not be able to do that. And I've been asking God to let me know the time. And let me know it's okay, that I've done all that I could do. So I say that to say, on the caregiver's part, you cannot do it all yourself. I heard you say, you know, my ex-husband is passed away when my daughter was 6. His brother has Parkinson. His daughter's trying to take care of him with her mother. My daughter can only do so much. So, and my life has changed because, and your life changes because of it. My job is my refuge because I feel like that's what I'm doing for me. That keeps me sane. And thank God I love microbiology and I love the job that I've had. I'm getting ready to retire in December, but I love the 38 years I've spent in that job. It has been my refuge. It has been my sanity. So I say that it's a blessing to have longevity. But I quite honestly say, I think about it and say, God, I want longevity, but I think I only have one child. And I've learned from the experience because fortunately my mother-in-law before she passed, and as she's getting sick, she was starting to show me certain things. So she was preparing. She was showing, some things I know, some things I still don't know. But I'm trying to find those things out so that when the time comes, which is inevitable for all of us, we know the day or time, that I have to take care of that house, because my brother-in-law can't. I had to change the will so that I was the executor so that I can take care of those things because he was the executor. You know, so there's things that you have to do legally that you don't even know and plan to do. I'm still trying to figure out some things to do with the house. My mother will always say, I'll never be able to sell this house because Harry done jacked up everything in his electrical, and he has done just that. So when I sell this house, it'll be as is. Whosoever will come and find it out the way you can. But my brother-in-law has given me the support and respect and understanding that and appreciation that he knows what I'm doing was what I can do. I love them both. They were, like I said, I knew them before I knew my husband. He was in California before I knew him. So I was already, if you knew me in this church, my mother and I were always doing stuff together. You know, so it's not uncommon. I have talked, people say, most people wouldn't take care of the in-laws. Well, they're not just my in-laws. You know, people say, I don't know how you do it. Well, they're more than that. And they're people that may not even be related to you, that you may serve that role in their lives. It's just how people have treated you, and God has put it in your spirit to treat others. So I know that in my own family, I see Nancy sitting here. She took care of my cousin Madeline for years. And she's still standing strong. And it wasn't always easy, but she knew that God put it in her spirit, and family is family. You know, Kim Nesbitt takes care of everybody, you know? So I've had the family input, but above all, who I am in Christ has been. This morning, I was shouting this morning because I knew I was coming here. I knew I had to share that. I put my song, my favorite song is It Is Well With My Soul. It is well. Thank God I grew up in the church to know who to call on in the times of trouble. Right. And who I will always know. And who has prepared me, as Esther prepared me for such a time as this. This is what God has done. So I thank him for the opportunity to serve him in this way. I'm 66 years old. I'm not getting any younger, and it's getting harder, you know. But God is faithful, and he always will be faithful. So I'm happy that I'm able to share this journey. And the journey's not over. My father-in-law is still here. Like I said, he turned 91 last week or 2 weeks ago. And he's fighting strong to live. So as long as he's fighting, I'm fighting with him. And the caregiver, like I can't praise her enough. She changes the diaper, whatever he does, she does it with a smile. She has the kindest heart. So I just thank her. I can't thank her enough, because God knew how much I could do, but He planted people in my path to what I needed. So I just thank Him for that. Thank you for letting me share this.
Thank you, ladies. You have shared with us your heartfelt, intimate emotions and details, and we appreciate you for that. And we're praying for you, praying for all three of you, and in particular, Lorraine, we're going to remember you in prayer.
Yes. Amen.
Trusting God. So you can take your seats. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. God bless, God bless, God bless. Oh, my Lord. Okay, thank you. All right, and so now we're going to have Jill Dispenza come up. And did I do that right, or did I miss something? That's right?
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Okay, you can introduce yourself.
Good morning? No, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jill Dispenza. I'm here to talk to you and present others who can back up what you've learned with patient advocacy here in Union County in our neighborhood. But I'm very quickly going to thank the three caregivers, because as we discussed earlier, I also lost my mom to Alzheimer's at the tender age of 74, 9 years ago this week. So I was a caregiver as well, and I was not presented with caregiver support in Alzheimer's groups, so the fact that we can tell you about that today makes me feel very happy. The first thing we are going to do is show a short video from the Alzheimer's Association. And someone else is in charge of getting that video up. But can you not hear me? Okay. So it's a short video, and then we will move on.
I met Jose when we were both in the United States Army. Actually, I was first lieutenant in the Army. I met Jose when we were both in the United States Army. Actually, I was the first lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps.
Wow, she was beautiful. And she is beautiful. She's a beautiful person inside and outside. And I just said that this is the one right here. This is the one.
Jose asked me to marry him 4 months into knowing him. He deployed to Somalia, Africa for a year while I planned the wedding, and then he came back just in time for us to get married. The first glaring sign was in September of 2013, which would have been our 20th wedding anniversary. And the day came and went without any awareness of the date. And Jose doesn't forget anniversaries. He doesn't forget special occasions at all. We attribute it to being overworked and exhaustion and a heavy schedule. And then 2014 came, and he forgot the next anniversary. And I said, there's something not right. He'd had PET scans, he'd had MRIs, and he had CTs, but it was the amyloid PET scan that was the confirmation. When the final diagnosis of Alzheimer's was given, the emotions were overwhelming. My hope became fragile.
I had let my family down. I felt like that I allowed myself to go down of some way, and just sadness. Sadness.
When I first reached out to the Alzheimer's Association, I needed an uncomplicated lifeline. They made it as easy and gentle as they possibly could in receiving us into a support group. It was kind, it was professional, it was filled with information, and that's what I needed.
Being engaged with the Alzheimer's Association has worked out well for us.
When we were at the Walk to End Alzheimer's, it was so encouraging. It's very positive, and you're just out there and you're trying to get a message out.
I really enjoy going to the program, and it makes me feel better. The people who I'm there with are with Alzheimer's, and so we all have a bond.
I had done my own research with the Alzheimer's Association, and it was a really good website that we were able to use in order to get a better understanding of what Alzheimer's was.
But most of our resources have come from the Alzheimer's Association. And so the pamphlets and the education.
I've called the Alzheimer's Association. The 24/7 helpline, our children know that if they see a behavior, if I'm not around, that they can call that helpline 24/7. It's that secret safety net that exists that you always know is available. I believe that in life, you either pay up front or you pay on the back end. And Jose paid into this marriage up front, and it is my honor. It is my absolute honor to care for him.
Well, every day you wake up, you want hope. And so I stick with that and move forward.
The Alzheimer's Association helped us to see this disease differently. It helped us to see it with hope, to see it with possibility. And it made me see that there is the reality of living with Alzheimer's disease.